For anyone who's joining us for the first time today in the session, what we're doing today is our Fulbright Awards 2021 Affinity Groups webinar, where we're talking to people from different Fulbright Affinity Groups or different backgrounds and asking them about their experiences so that you can think about that as part of your application and things to think about when choosing a university or where to go in the US, and also just getting ready to make that move to another country, which can be a big move. Especially if you're going to do something like a PhD, which could be several years. So we hope useful to hear from people who may share an experience or a background with you. A little bit of housekeeping today. All of our sessions are being recorded, so you'll be able to come back to anything you missed at a later date. If you found that information helpful, but maybe weren't able to keep up with it all the time, or if there's a session going on that you think will be really helpful or relevant to you that you're not able to make, you'll be able to catch that as well on the recording in the near future. We also have subtitles running, so if you need closed captioning, you can turn those on at the bottom of your Zoom UI, and you'll be able to adjust the settings so that they're in a font size that you can read. And then we also have our Q&A box, which we ask you to use for questions rather than the chat. So if you have any questions that come up throughout a session, be sure to throw them into the Q&A box, and either myself or my colleague Angelina will be there to read it and pass it on to our panelists. So with that all out of the way, I'm going to turn to Yusra first to introduce yourself, and then Louise, I'll ask you to do that next. So Yusra, if you could talk to us a little bit about your background and your Fulbright so far.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Yusra. I'm a consultant eye surgeon, and I am based in Sussex in the UK. And I decided to apply for a Fulbright. So I was at a real juncture in my career where I suppose I wanted to do some research to open some doors and to be able to access funding in the UK and to diversify, what I do, not just clinical work and surgery, but I wanted to be more active in an academic glaucoma department. So that's my area of specialist interest. It's glaucoma, which is a condition of the nerve that connects the back of the eye to the brain. And my research focuses on how to aid early diagnosis for that condition. And so my background getting to this point, I'd been to medical school. I did 2 years of general training as a doctor. And then I applied to ophthalmic training, which in the UK has really had an overhaul, I'd say, in the last 15 years or so. So when I applied in 2011, I actually applied and got onto a 7-year training program. And that makes it challenging to try to incorporate research and training because you're on a kind of treadmill. You have hundreds of competencies to sign off. You're trying to learn how to operate, and you're doing lots of exams along the way. So to try to shoehorn research into that, you end up doing a lot in your spare time. Some people decide to take time out to do an MD or a PhD, but I decided that wasn't really right for me because doing sort of a practical subspecialty like that, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a 3 or 4 year gap in learning how to do microsurgery. I really wanted to get that, I wanted to feel really competent in that before taking time out to do dedicated research. And so this felt like the right time for me in my career. I'll be completely honest with you, I wanted to do it about 18 months before now, but COVID got in the way. And I now have a 5-month-old baby who's with me. And I thought it might have worked out easier, I guess, without a 5-month-old baby, but biological clocks don't really wait for anyone. So she's here, she's upstairs, roomy, having her lunchtime nap, good as gold. And so I'll talk to you, I want to share as much as I can or to help people who are considering coming over with a family. It's definitely doable. You get so much support from the Fulbright team. And so far, I think it's worked really nicely. And it's been a real plus. Like I've met so many different people and communities because of Rumi, and it's a real door opener having a baby here as well. So I just feel like I haven't been here for that long, but I feel like I've already made quite a lot of friends, and I've had 2 sort of freshly baked cakes left at my doorstep in 1 month, which I think that's more than I've ever had in the UK. So I just think, yeah, she attracts baked goods, if nothing else. And I'm aware that I'm probably rambling and talking for too long for an introduction, but that is me in a nutshell and a short version of how I came to be here today.
I guess just quickly, one detail we could add is whereabouts in the US you are right now, and where you're based for your research.
So I'm in Boston and I'm working with Harvard University and Massachusetts Eye and Ear Hospital. It's really great being attached to a hospital because it's been more in person, I think, than it might have otherwise been. The hospitals is basically fully functional now with COVID measures in place. And, you know, my colleagues there have gone back to basically where they were pre-COVID. So the timing is worked out quite nicely for that.
And Louise, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your Fulbright and how you came to get there.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Louise Lavictoire. I'm based up in Cumbria in the Lake District. I'm currently here. So I did my Fulbright in 2017, 2018, well before any COVID nonsense was going on. So really fortunate, and wow, Yusra, that's amazing that you're doing this now in this day and age when this is all going on as well. That's just an added complication to pile onto the other complications that come along with having family to get out to the States. So kudos. So I work for a small environmental charity. We have a captive breeding program for a species of freshwater mussel, which is endangered. And before I applied to do Fulbright, we were basically kind of trying to figure out how to breed these tiny mussels that really, really difficult to breed. They seem to be engineered for extinction. Everything you want to do to try and help them, they just end up dying. So the whole thrust of me going to the States was to try and learn from researchers out there who had been working with other species of freshwater mussel and had really cracked it in terms of the methods, how to do it successfully. And we're moving on to answering some of these kind of really important questions in their research that we hadn't even dreamed of, because we were still trying to crack that nut of how to do the captive breeding side of things really well. So it seemed like a really sensible time to kind of go over to the States and do this. I'd finished my PhD on working with the species. I have two boys, so at the time they were just turned 1 and just turning 4, so still quite young, preschool, and that was another thing that kind of made me think it would be nice to do it when they're not at school. I'm not necessarily kind of taking them out of school when they're trying to form friendship groups and things like that. Not that I think that's an issue, because I've heard of other Fulbrighters that have taken their kids out of school for a year and that it's just added to their experience. So I think being in an American school system would have been a really cool thing as well. It's just my kids weren't old enough. So yeah, we went over with a toddler that was only just walking and a 4-year-old, both high energy boys, and it was great. They integrated really well into the American way of life. We put the older one into daycare a couple of days a week, just so that he had some time with his peers. And it was a great way for him to make friends out there as well, and to give my husband a little break with and then he could only have one for a couple of days whilst I was out at the university. So I went to Missouri State University in Missouri, and we were out there for 9 months between kind of August 2017 and the following May 2018. And it was brilliant. I loved Missouri State University. It was a great university. My mentor, who I was working under, Dr. Chris Barnhart, he was fantastic, both from a professional and personal point of view. He and his wife, Deb, adopted the kids basically as honorary grandchildren. So it was just really lovely to kind of slot into a family life out there. Everybody was, super helpful. And I think, as you said, having kids kind of opens conversations that you would otherwise not have, and also give you a chance to be a bit of a kid as well. So like Halloween out there was just one of the best things ever. It was just brilliant. So yeah, I think going out with kids, whilst it can seem daunting, it's just a brilliant thing to do. The other thing to kind of just very briefly mention before I start rambling is that we did and ah about whether we could do it with 2 kids, whether it would be too much of a scary, difficult thing. Particularly our youngest had quite a few health issues, which weren't looking like they were going to resolve themselves before we went out there. So we had that kind of extra stress to think about. And it just, in the end, we just decided to do it. We planned if we needed hospitals while we were out there, we knew where we were going to take him. And so if your kids do have health issues, the healthcare system is very good, and as long as you've got we just made sure that we had really good health insurance in place to cope with anything that might crop up. And I think the kids didn't use it at all. We ended up using it more than the kids, so it was all fine in the end. But it's just a bit of extra planning that we had to do. But I'm so pleased we did it. I'm going to stop talking now because I could ramble along forever about it.
Well, we're gonna come back to you soon. We're just yeah, I think that was really helpful as a introduction, both of you. And I guess thinking about this process of moving out there, especially because both of you had quite young families as you were going, moving country for an extended period of time is a daunting process as an adult. And suddenly you've got people coming with you who can't necessarily pack for themselves and will have substantially different needs to what you might have as an adult moving country. So how did you find that process, and was it a lot of added stress, or was it just something that you're used to because you're used to the demands that having a child has on your everyday life already at home, and expected this to be part of that process?
Do you want to go first, Louise, or shall I?
Yeah, I think the thing that I was most not stressed is not the right word, but the most conscious of was just making sure that the visa situation worked okay. I wanted that to go fairly seamlessly, because being tired at an airport when you're trying to get through customs and that kind of thing is one thing, but doing it with a wriggly 1-year-old and a tired 4-year-old is another thing. But all of that worked fairly seamlessly. Packing, all of that kind of, they don't need a lot of stuff. We literally took like a suitcase between them for both of them. We took the bare minimum toys, and everything else we bought out there and sold again before we left. So it was toy wise, we didn't take a lot. And it actually, I don't think it was particularly stressful having little people to consider as well. They're quite laid back kids as well, so they were just quite accepting that they were along for the ride.
Yeah, I suppose I'm not sure if it added to the stress or not, because I don't know any other way of doing this other than bringing the baby. And I would have found it a hell of a lot more stressful if I hadn't brought my family, because I think if I'd left a 4-month-old baby and came back next May or June, that that sort of period of development that I would have missed would have been heartbreaking, really. So I just knew that I would only have done it this way, and I was so grateful that I was part of this program that is so supportive for bringing along dependents. And I felt really supported every step of the way with the administration side of things. In terms of packing, like we deliberately didn't sort of hoard a lot, because we knew that this move was coming. And we ended up coming here at a time that coincided with what's known as Alston Christmas, which I don't know if it's unique to Boston or not, but about 75% of the population, the rental population, moves around like at the end of August / beginning of September. So the stuff that's just left out for people to take is absolute gold. We picked up so much baby stuff, and we're still getting a continuous stream of messages saying, do you want a high chair? Do you want a stroller? Do you want this and that? And there's just such a big community for sort of giving. And if you can plug yourself into these sort of forums and groups for parents, they're just every few months, everyone wants to get rid of the next batch of clothes and toys, etc. So that's, I think, a really useful way of acquiring stuff when you can't pack everything back in the UK. Yeah, I agree with what you said, Louise, about until you've touched down on US soil, you're out of the airport, you feel that there might be some sort of hiccup that could hold you back. So you do breathe a huge sigh of relief once you're back and you've picked up your luggage and climbing into a taxi. So yeah, that's yeah, luckily there were no issues at all with the paperwork at the airports or with customs. And well, moved to the East Coast, I guess, it's a shorter flight. And you know, I think a 4-month-old is probably a bit more amenable than a toddler, perhaps, on a flight. So it wasn't too bad. I was expecting the worst, and she was actually great on the flight.
As in terms of time out there, so you've talked a little bit about support you've received from your local community, and Louise, you touched on your host academic being almost becoming part of the family. Have you found that you've had much support from your universities in terms of either flexibility around family life, or are there on-campus resources? Like, is there a creche on campus or things like that you've been able to access? I suppose more broadly, what kind of support have you found that's more, I guess, institutional than just in the community? I guess we'll start with yours this time and then go back.
Yeah, I haven't really looked for that yet because Rumi's a bit young for care in that sense. So I haven't looked for that institutional support yet, but my collaborators, I think most of them do have young children, so they're really understanding about the need to be flexible sometimes. And I think the gift that COVID has given, not just for this, but many things, is the flexibility to work from home. And I think most people are used to using these sorts of communication platforms, which I think works really well for this kind of collaborative research. I've been given access to sort of every program I need from an encrypted laptop. And I think that would have happened anyway with a baby or not, because of the environment, and the need to socially distance in offices means that I think it's almost encouraged that when you can work from home, you ought to, just to reduce that risk of crowding in office spaces. I can get back to you about what institutional support is available. I haven't looked for that yet in terms of pressures and support that way. But like I say, my collaborators, they've all been really welcoming, and they've invited us to meet them and their children and dogs, etc. So that's all been fabulous. Couldn't have asked for any more, really.
Yeah, I think very similar kind of story. Because my husband was there with the kids, we didn't need anything in terms of daycare or childcare, but we did put our eldest into a daycare for a few hours, a couple of days a week, just more for his enjoyment and entertainment than anything else. So he made friends with his peers, and just had that kind of that bit of normality, because he was part-time in daycare in the UK at the time as well. So that was kind of a continuation for him. In terms of, so that wasn't a campus one, that was just one that was around the corner from us that we could walk to, or my husband could walk to. So that was really easy. That was more just for ease. There were departmental events that we went to, that kids and family members were welcome to as well. So that was really nice to kind of integrate into the academic community a bit more, and for the kids to meet to meet younger ones as well. Yeah, I guess we didn't access it because we didn't need it, but I think if we'd looked for it, it's fairly easy to find at most universities, I think.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. I suppose almost not needing to access it is almost better, like good news, I think, for anyone listening, as much as knowing that it's there, because it shows how doable this all is with your family. I suppose a question for Louise, more specifically, that I've had passed on to me is, did you have any difficulty with your kids transitioning back to life in the UK on returning after 9 months in the US?
Not that I remember. It was 3 years ago now, but that was fairly seamless. And I don't know whether that's just because their personalities are, like I say, they're quite laid back and quite accepting. They hadn't been, they weren't in school, and the eldest was just going to be starting school in the September. We came back in the May, so he kind of went back a couple of days a week to the kind of nursery that he was at, and it did seem fairly fairly seamless. The younger one didn't really know any different.
Right.
Obviously, he knew that the people he was around had changed, and he obviously didn't remember our house. But yeah, it was quite. I think my husband and I found it more difficult to adjust to being back in the UK. We just wanted to go back to the US because we loved it so much.
And for both of you, is there anything you wish you'd known about this process when you were applying that you know now, that you want to pass on to people making an application? I'll start with you, Yusra.
I don't think I've sort of learned anything specific that I didn't know before in sort of the month that I've been here. I'm just trying to think what might be helpful to know. I suppose, one of the anxieties was not knowing where we're going to live, which would be more sort of easier to deal with if we didn't have a baby as well. So initially we booked a kind of hotel suite thing with a little kitchen and basically lived in one big sort of studio place, which is not so easy with a baby, while we were house hunting. But I suppose just you can make things a bit easier for yourself, I think, by at least sort of searching that rental market a bit or contacting people locally to at least pin down some areas that you might be interested in. So we sort of did that while we were all in country. And I think that would have been useful to have done before, but it just all felt quite touch and go before we actually got here. So didn't want to invest huge amounts of time looking specifically. I suppose that might have made things a bit easier to have sort of looked at the different areas in greater detail before we actually got here.
For me, if I'd known then what I know now, I think that the biggest thing I would say was don't worry. Like, I worried so much about things like that, like where are we going to live? What's the healthcare system like? How are we going to how are we going to kind of do the daily stuff that we need to do, and thinking about things like getting around, because Missouri, where we were in Springfield, everything's so far apart. Maybe it's different in Boston because it's a city, whereas Springfield was a city, but it was very dispersed. Everything is a long distance. I could walk to campus because of where we got an Airbnb, a long-term Airbnb, before we went out there, but everything was far. Like the supermarket was far, and especially when you've got kids that aren't very mobile, they don't want to be walking far. So I probably would have researched a bit more about cars and how the process of buying a car and getting licensed and all of that kind of thing. But I hadn't even thought about that before I went out. But I guess the going back to the not worrying thing, as soon as I got the letter saying you've been accepted, you're going to America, I started worrying about everything. But then the more that I kind of asked questions from the Fulbright team and went to those days, those induction days, the amount of information that you're provided with is fantastic, and the support you're provided with is fantastic. So don't worry, breathe, take a breath, consider everything that's important to you. And if you've got questions, every question we had was answered by the Fulbright team. So I think, yeah, don't stress about it too much, and just do it, because it's the best. It was the best kind of 9 months of my personal and academic career. So just do it.
I was going to say, and I suppose it's still worth reiterating, is either would you do it again, or would you recommend people who are perhaps umming and ahhing about whether they should take the chance to apply, and especially think about going with their families? Would you still recommend that people do it, having done it? And Louise, it sounds like you do, and you're sort of, I imagine, probably the same based on what you've said today, but I guess the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I definitely encourage anyone thinking about it to go for it. I mean, it was so exciting to receive that news that I was successful, and it'd been something I've been thinking about for many years. and to have that opportunity is absolutely golden. And it probably will add an element of stress and logistical difficulty to bring along your family, but it also adds a lot as well to your experience while you're here. And you know, it is a hard thing to uproot yourself when you're settled somewhere. But in a way, for me personally, I found it easier to have brought my family rather than leaving them and coming alone. Particularly, it's such a sort of critical developmental time for my daughter. And just see it as an adventure, because it will be an adventure and an exciting thing to do. And on the back of so many lockdowns, it feels like a real blessing to even have the opportunity to be here.
Thank you both today for taking time out of your day to come and talk to us and talk about your experiences. It's been really helpful and really heartening to hear about both your experiences, and I really hope that people listening in today take what you've said to heart and take the opportunity to make that application and are successful